Thank you, Lupe, for that introduction. You know what that means when people kind of do a laundry list of all your experiences? It means you're a lot older than just about everybody else, right? I've been doing this for a long time. In fact, I did start, just a quick anecdote before I start my presentation. I started at UW-Madison. You guys may be familiar with UW-Madison. It's up in Wisconsin. And when I got there in the mid-'70s, late '70s, again, that dates me, but they used to refer to us as the Berkeley of the Midwest, right? And you know, there's a reason for that, right? There's a history of activism and a tradition of activism here at Berkeley. Social activism, anti-war activism. Well, Madison was the same thing, right? We had a lot, when I arrived in the mid-late '70s, it was kind of the aftermath of a lot of anti-war demonstrations and movements there. So when people would say, well, you guys are the Berkeley of the Midwest, I go, no, Berkeley is the Madison of the West, right? So we kind of would spin that a little bit. But at any rate, it's great to come from that kind of tradition and that kind of history of social activism. And that was one of the things that when I arrived in Madison, I know Omar wanted to have me share a little bit of my story, and I'll kind of maybe interweave some of that narrative, personal narrative, when I'm doing my presentation. But when I arrived in Madison, I was lucky enough to be mentored by a couple of individuals. Prospero Saiz, who was a professor who taught the very first Chicano Lit class in Madison, also taught a Marxist literature class, right? So armed with Chicano discourse and Marxist discourse, I was able to kind of utilize that in my work. But more importantly, he kind of epitomized for me what a scholar activist is, and that's something I aspire to, and that's something I've written about. And I think that what a scholar activist allows you to do is be able to bridge the university and the community, and that's not always easy to do, right? Because the community has different demands and needs than the university. We understand that, right? And so at some point you got to make a decision, right? And a scholar activist underscores the fact that you're putting community first and foremost, right, at the expense, but not always the expense of the university. But I think together you can do a lot of great things. You can leverage those resources at the university to impact change in the community. And so Dr. Saiz, Luis Salas, who had organized farm workers in Wisconsin, contemporaneous with Cesar Chavez, by the way. A lot of that history hasn't been written about the movement in the Midwest for farm workers. So Jesus Salas was a grad student at the time. He was a mentor. And that's really part of the work that we do at Project Males. I'm going to talk a little bit about, I came on board at Project Males about 8 months ago, kind of relatively new, but I've been working with Dr. Sainz. Victor Sainz was the founder of Project Males. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the work that we do at Project Males. We've been around for about 4 years. But before that, I want to start a little bit with a little context. But I do want to thank, by the way, Omar and Javier for being great hosts and taking care of me and arranging my flight. I want to acknowledge that, because that's also an important part of doing these things, right? To make sure your hotel's okay and your flight is uneventful. But at any rate, let me start with a little context, and Omar has already kind of shared some of that context. I'm going to talk about some data points that are similar to what Omar shared with you, but a little bit different, and then also dig deeper into the Texas context, and then talk a little bit about the discourses. I like that you brought up this idea of dominant discourses, of meta-narratives that cast our young men in certain kinds of ways, because when you talk about context, you need to talk about, on the one hand, the statistics that are out there, because a lot of times you need to convince people, why are you working with Latino males? Why are you working with black males? You know, don't we need to don't all students matter, right? We've heard that response to the Black Lives Matter movement. Well, yes, they do. But more importantly, brown male lives matter and black male lives matter because of the data that shows that they're not doing well. And we know that, right? And that's why you guys are here and women are here, is to deal with those issues. And sometimes you need to convince people. You need to show them the statistics and say, look, this is the reality that's out there. So data is important. And also talking about it in terms of discourses, counter-narratives, counter-discourses. And that's something that we're trying to do at Project Males and the Texas Ed Consortium for Male Students of Color. So I'm going to talk about those two initiatives. and then our mentoring program, which is a key part of this work. So, but first, let me start with my PowerPoint. All right, again, this graphic here, this is a book that just came out. It was published by Dr. Panwan, Dr. Saenz, who were the founders of Project Males, and by Dr. Julie Figueroa as well. And that's important to point out, by the way, that this work, while it's focused on males, it's not an exclusively Latino male space or an African American male space, because we can't do this work alone, right? We need our sisters out there to support us. And I'll talk a little bit about how that plays out in the work that we do. So Dr. Figueroa, of course, was a co-author with Dr. Panwan and Dr. Saenz, and we just published this about a month ago. So I think you can find it on Amazon.com. So you wanted me to do a pitch, by the way. So again, thanks to the Center for Latino Policy Research for hosting this event and hosting me. So a little bit about our rationale, okay, and then I'll segue into the data points that I was going to share with you. So a lot of this information you're probably familiar with. In Texas and across the country, maybe I'll pull this out so I can, there we go. In Texas and across the country, Latino and African American males are struggling along the educational pathways relative to peers. We know that, right? We've seen the data out there. They're also at key junctures of the pipeline, they're struggling. We know that at high school graduation, they're having problems, at college entry and at college completion. In Texas, we have the Texas Higher Education Board. Texas Higher Education Board has released a policy imperative, statewide policy imperative, to address this issue. And this happened in 2010. By the way, for those of you who are familiar with the national imperative, right, My Brother's Keeper, President Obama, this precedes that national imperative, right? So we were doing work along Latino males and African American males back in 2010, the beginning of our project. And of course, the state realized that that was an issue and preceded the national imperative, which, by the way, we're also very integrally involved. Omar mentioned earlier that it's important to bring in stakeholders and partners and to strengthen the work that you do. And one of the partners, a very key partner that we work with, is My Brother's Keeper, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. So to deal with these three issues and priorities, we realized that something needed to be done, and something needed to be done on a large scale, right? We needed to have an impact locally, which we're doing through our mentoring program at Austin, and we're also having a statewide, we decided to create a statewide consortium of institutions to deal with this issue, because you need to bring as many players and stakeholders into your realm of work. And so we realized that to address these issues, we needed to create a comprehensive coordinated approach by key stakeholders across the continuum, alignments that was focused on alignment of metrics for success, development of a learning and knowledge community, a research agenda focused on Latino males, and focused academic interventions, which is our mentoring program. All right, so this graphic's not showing up too well, but what, so this is a graph of entry of high school graduates, comparison between different subgroups into college. And as you can see, do I have a pointer on this thing? Yeah. At any rate, here's the Hispanic. You can see Hispanics is 49 to 69. That's a 20% increase from 2000 to 2012. Compare that to the other subgroups. Asian, 2%. Whites, lower. Blacks as well. So what we see is 20% of our students are now getting into college, right? But what happens when they get into college? For males, we can see that we're not doing so well, right? On the left graph, you see Latinos. When you combine the associate, bachelor's, and graduate degrees that are being earned, only 20% of all Hispanic males are earning degrees. Compare that to 45% white, and 30% African American, and 62% Asian. So when we are getting into college, but we're not necessarily finishing up. So again, we're not earning degrees, which is one measure of success. All right, now disaggregating by gender. Again, there's a lot of ways to look at data. You can disaggregate it multiple ways. Compared to our Latina sisters, males are also not doing very well, right? I think a lot of you are familiar with those statistics. Beginning in 1990, we see a separation of degrees being earned. You see the higher line is Latinas, the lower line is Latino males. And projecting beyond 2016, you see that separation continues to grow, right? And so unless we deal with that issue now and in a coordinated way, we're going to continue to see that separation. And another graph that kind of shows that representation in terms of associate's degree and BAs. Again, Latinas earning 60% of the degrees compared to Latino males earning 40%. And that was data from 2013. National Center for Educational Statistics put this out. Again, there's a lot of data out there. It's starting to grow. One thing, there was a lack of data in research up until about 2007-8. There was a movement, a push to create more data tracking Latino males. In comparison, African American male research has been going on for about at least 30 years, and there's about 5 or 6 research centers around the country doing African American research. We're the only large-scale research center around the country. There are small programs around the country that are also doing this work, but very little research was being done on Latino males up until about 2008, 2009. And so in the last 10 years, there's been an increase in this research. And we're not caught up, obviously, with African American males because they have about a 20 or 30 year head start on us. So we're slowly beginning to develop that research through our research agenda. Okay, what does it look like in Texas? Okay, so very similar. Omar shared some data in California, and very similar kinds of demographic. The changing demographics is increasingly Latino as it is in California. So the demographics are changing in Texas and they're continuing to increase. Very similar to California. So these statistics are probably very similar to California. You see here males being represented, white males. There was a cohort of students, and they started tracking in 96, 98. After 11 years, they tried to determine how many had enrolled in post-secondary ed. You see that all male 8th graders, 47.9%, compare that to black males, which is 40.9, and Latino males, which is 36.5. So in Texas, obviously those numbers are pretty glaring, right? You know, the big difference between our males, black males and Latino males in comparison to all males. Again, gender, we can see the differences here between that same cohort, all male 8th graders versus all female, 47.9 versus 57.2. Again, these are all male and females, but those the data for Latinas and Latinos are very, very similar to those differences. In fact, probably even greater. So one of the things that Omar talked about was the importance of, so you present part of that context through this idea of data points and data. You also want to address the narratives, right? What are the dominating meta-narratives that are out there about our men of color? And you're probably going to be familiar with some of these that come up. Describing the situation as a male crisis, right? Again, part of the deficit discourse that's out there. Endangered species. We heard about our young men being endangered. Culturally damaged, right? That one comes up quite a bit. missing or vanishing males, need to be saved, right? Deviant behavior. We got to modify their behavior towards respectability, right? Again, in sum, these are those deficit narratives and deficit discourses that are out there about our young men of color. Can anybody think of any other references to our young men that might fall into this category of deficit discourse or deficit narratives?
Uneducated.
Uneducated, right? Any others? Right. So it's kind of this
they're looking to their lives and what happened to get them to get incarcerated.
exact kind of a pathologization of Latino males or African American males. Certainly, for sure, at risk is another one. Right? You guys, at risk has been around for a long time. So again, so this is, first of all, you have to acknowledge that these are deficit discourses, and you start breaking those down. But the way to respond to these discourses, of course, is a competing discourse, right? A counter discourse. And Omar was referencing that in terms of talking about the programs that these men face from a more critical lens, right? And that would be from a structural or institutional lens, right? Is rather than individualize the problem, which these narratives do, you want to address the problem from a structural or institutional vantage point. And so that's the work that we're trying to do. We're trying to address those deficit narratives, but also provide counter narratives and create those narratives that are actually more critical. So one of the ways that we identify issues and problems, one of the ways that we create some of that counter discourse is to identify some of the factors that are in fact impacting our young men. And again, Omar pointed out the school to prison pipeline, right? There's a lot been written about the school to prison pipeline. A lot of work has been done. We are also partnering with a couple of organizations. One of them is called Texas Appleseed in Austin, Texas. And they're doing a lot of work with school to prison pipeline. And so we know that our young men are being disciplined in higher rates in schools. I mentioned earlier, I'm part of the MBK Alliance, the Greater Austin Area MBK. And I am on the exec committee, also a co-chair of one of the 6 subcommittees. And that committee is Second Chance Violence Prevention. And we're focused on the school to prison issue. And we're collecting data. We just came together about a year and a half ago, but we're starting to collect data as a subcommittee. And we are seeing our young men, Latino and African American men, being disciplined at 2 and 3 times the rates of our white young boys, right, in the Austin Independent School District. So we know that exists. We are tracking that data. And then we're going to begin to develop solutions to address those issues, working with partners like Texas Appleseed, for example. Again, another issue is chronic absenteeism. That's a focal point of MBK. And so we're working with our young men that are having absentee issues in our mentorship program to address those issues. Some other factors that we point to: overrepresentation in special education. A lot of them are particularly in the behavioral emotional challenge categories. Fewer males in the teaching ranks, right? How many of you have in your K-12 experiences, can you recall back to your high school, middle school, how many of you had Latino males in the classroom, in middle school and high school? Anybody?
Spanish class.
What's that?
Spanish class.
In Spanish class, right? In fact, you just reminded me, the only Latina, and she was Latina by the way, was in Spanish in my high school. I think there might have been a coach, and I wasn't even sure if he was even Latino or not, but he might have been. Anybody else?
I have one Latino male in my whole high school.
In your high school experience? Maybe one, right?
He was a substitute teacher.
Of course, he was a substitute teacher, right? Yes.
We had the fortune of having a Panameño Latino vice principal who was a high school teacher at the same school.
That's right. There's also that. We have Latinos, but they're not Mexicano, they're not Chicano, right? And so there's also that dynamic. Luca mentioned some of the work I did earlier with the Center for Community College Student Engagement. And that was a research center focused on community colleges, and I led the qualitative research work. And I traveled around the country interviewing young men of color, black men, brown men, and we went all over the country. You know, California, Texas, Florida, the usual suspects where we have a large Latino population. Also Michigan, believe it or not. And I went to Michigan because one of our funders was Kresge, so I had to go to Michigan and do focus groups. There were only about 44%, I think, Latino males up there. But one of the things that I found is that these very anecdotal kinds of experiences, that these men did not have Latino male figures, right? They didn't have African American male figures in the classroom. They didn't have role models. And sometimes they get them when they arrive in college, and even then, they might have taken a Spanish lit class or something, or a Spanish linguistics class. But even those challenges, even when you get into college, I was fortunate enough to have a couple of mentors that I mentioned earlier, Dr. Saiz in my classroom. And it was by the way, I did mention I took a Chicano studies class. That was the very first one offered. It was in the late 70s, right? And they had a pretty good size Latino population there. So it took them until the late 70s to actually create a Chicano studies program, which then catalyzed and morphed into a Chicano studies program that we were all part of. So, again, Omar, this box on the left, Omar pointed out to the differences between the two neighborhoods. Omar, you mentioned one was called the Hood. And what was the other one called? Hills? That's interesting because we have hills in Austin too. And the hills in Austin are where all the white folk with a lot of money live and generally have the better schools, right? And in East Austin, which is our Hood, our barrio, right? Black and brown, although that's quickly changing due to gentrification, right? And I know you guys are also experiencing that here in San Francisco. We are experiencing it in a big way in Austin. And East Austin used to be predominantly black, brown, and black working class. And that's where you still find most of our communities. And they have under-resourced schools, right? The conditions are really bad in comparison to West Austin. Teacher turnover is high. There's one school, Johnson High School, has not changed, name changed a couple of times. They couldn't keep a principal more than 1 year. For about 6 or 7 years, you kept getting that turnover. So we know there's differences in the conditions that our young men face. All right, so I've been talking about all these different, think about them in terms of narratives, right? Narratives around the data, narratives around policies and imperatives. We got the demographic imperative. We talked about this growing population of Latinos and Latinas. They can't ignore us, right? I mean, we're in pretty large numbers in all the usual states, right? The California, the Texas, and the Floridas. But also, you're starting to find a lot of us in North Carolina, right? I think we just exceeded Puerto Ricans in New York for the largest Latino subgroup. And and Michigan even, you know, Wisconsin, where I went to school. So we're all over, right? And they can't ignore us. So that's a demographic imperative. And then, of course, the closing achievement gap. I've been talking about those things. All right, so now I'm going to move into the work that we do and how we're responding to those data points that I mentioned and that Omar pointed out here in California, but also nationally. And also how we're addressing those narratives that are out there about our young men. So when we talk about Project Males, Males, I like that. I like Males because that's more Latino, right? Or Mexicano, Chicano. But it's Males is an acronym for Mentoring to Achieve Latino Educational Success, right? And so it stands for, it kind of underscores our focus on Latino males, but not exclusively Latino males, although most of our work is Latino males. It started in 2010. It's based at the Division of Diversity and Community Engagement at UT Austin. And that's a very important point. I mentioned earlier that we get support from grants. That's the nature of this work. A lot of times you're reliant on soft money, right? And you're relying on grants, and every 3 years you got to go out there and hustle for that money again. And we're at that 3-year cycle. We're hustling for money from Greater Texas Foundation, TG. They're going to step up and support us for another 3 years. We also have another foundation, Kresge, but don't quote me on that because it's not a done deal yet, but I'm working on a proposal. Hopefully we'll get Kresge to step up, and they're going to support us for the next 3 years. But the only way that this is successful is to get institutional support, and we get that through DDCE, through the leadership of Dr. Gregory Vinson, who's a senior VP at UT. And so it's really a combination of all those support systems that allow us to do this work, because this is expensive work. This takes a lot of money to run a research agenda, which is one of our initiatives, our mentoring program, and this consortium of institutions around the state. And I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about that. I've got 15 minutes, is that about? Okay. So I'll move quickly into this and then show a quick video, and then I'll open it up for any questions and answers. But there'll be opportunities to do for me. I'm going to be here for most of the day, so I'll be able to talk to you guys if you have questions. So research agenda consists of the usual things: producing briefs, articles, op-eds, books. We also have faculty research affiliates around the country. There's 23 of them and growing. In fact, we just did an Excellency in Ed webinar, and we got a couple of Ph.D. folks that were either directors or finished their doctorate, or about to finish their doctorate, who found out about us and wanted to contribute a research brief. And so we have our faculty research affiliates produce research briefs. We've produced about 5 of them, and that's part of our research agenda. So building this network, learning community of research affiliates around the country. And again, these are folks that are probably their only the only academic or professor or researcher that's doing work on Latino males on that institution. So we're able to provide them with kind of a network of support, leveraging our resources at UT and at Texas A&M, which is our other partner institution. Mentoring program, which I'll talk about here in a moment, and then the consortia. We started with 14 institutions, school districts, community colleges, universities. We're now at 19. We're adding 3 more in the last month. I've sent out 3 or 4 more invitation letters. So we're continuing to build the consortia as people become aware of our work. So I'm going to run through these 4 objectives about the consortia, how we run the consortia, a little bit about the mentoring program, and then about the research agenda that I was referring to. Again, why consortium for males of color? I mentioned earlier that it takes a statewide approach to deal with this problem. You want to deal with it locally, but of course, in numbers comes strength. And so we have a lot of institutions involved in this work. And the scale of the challenge is statewide and nationwide. So we need to address it with a statewide solution. We're talking about bringing together these success metrics. So, you know, when you talk to ISDs, you talk to community colleges, you talk to universities, they don't necessarily always talk about the same, in terms of the same outcomes or language. So we're trying to combine that discourse so we're all on the same page. And we're looking at this as a pathway, right, an educational pipeline that begins in middle school, high school, into community college, university, and hopefully beyond. And then again, this notion of collective impact, right? We're more effective across sectors, ISD, community college, universities, and we need to move the needle at the statewide level, right? And even more so. All right, these are some of our institutions. We represent 6 of the urban areas of Texas: Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, Austin, El Paso. Believe it or not, there's an urban center down the valley. The valley people typically think of that as an agricultural area, but McAllen, Harlingen make up about 1.2 million MSA, right? So again, but that's not fully representative because, like I said, I've just added 3 or 4 more institutions on there. I didn't have time to update the graphic because I got to go through my design people to add. I guess I could have scribbled it in, but at any rate, there's at least 3 more institutions on there and another 10 or 12 that are ready to join our consortium. We have an executive advisory council made up of representatives from 3 of the sectors, 12 members, 9 of them, 3 of them from each of the sectors. And importantly, as Omar pointed out, you need to have student voice, right? So we have 3 student representatives on that advisory council. 1 from each of the 3 sectors, ISDs, community colleges, universities. And so Their voice counts is very important in the work that we do. And we do that, collect their voice through a number of ways, right? I'll say a little bit about that here in a minute. And then we have, again, we created these bylaws, we have a membership, we have committees, we have 2 committees, program committee and a membership committee. Our program committee is involved with setting up these consortium meetings. Again, we've had 6 of them. These are the subject issues that we talk about. We convene them, again, twice a year. We have one of the institutions host us. Again, it's an opportunity for us to all come together. All 14 institutions, now 19 institutions. And the issues that we address. Another part of that second objective is this Texas Male Student Leadership Summit, and that's an annual event. And we invite all our consortium members to send a team of faculty, staff, administrators, sometimes VPs show up, but they're required to bring at least 10 young men with them, right? Latino, African American, or other, to this event. And this is the last event that we had, 2015. And we get about 300 folks that show up. 200 of them are young men, community college, university guys. And so it's really powerful to bring these young men together in this space for 2 days, right? We do panels, we do workshops, we do keynotes. We feed them, gotta feed them. And we're gonna have some, we're gonna expand this thing. We're gonna have a cultural arts piece. We've expanded to have a K-12 component, because right now we're just focused on community college universities. But we're going to have a K-12 component. So this thing continues to grow and build. And although it's limited to consortium members, we are opening it up to folks outside of the consortia, either in the state or outside of Texas. Because we're starting to get calls from folks from other states that want to participate. And I extend an invitation to the UC Berkeley folks, to Lupe or Mar, however, maybe you guys can join us. It's August 11th, 12th. 2016, we hosted at UT Austin, and again, we love to see you there, see some UC Berkeley folks there, and you can see how we do that event. The mentoring program is our one of our strategic interventions, one of our educational interventions. There's a lot of programs out there that support men of color, but we focus on mentoring because we think that that's one of the most powerful interventions that we can impact our young men through mentoring. And so this graph kind of shows the development over the 4 years that we've had the program. We've built it up. We've added mentors, undergraduate mentors. We've added mentees. We've added schools. But it takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of resources to do this work, right? Because our model is near peer intergenerational. And near peer meaning that we recruit undergraduate mentors from the university. We take them to the schools, and then we interact with them in a group and one-on-one kind of mentorship relationship. But as you can imagine, that takes a lot of work because we're up to over 100 mentors. We're up to 8 schools now, 4 high schools, 4 middle schools. The middle schools we work with are feeder schools into the high school, so we want to start with our young men in middle school and keep them through high school and hopefully beyond. And this handout that Omar included in the packet, we address a lot of those issues, a lot of those intervention strategies in the mentoring that we do, the college know-how, the readiness, social and emotional well-being. Our curriculum is kind of organized around social and emotional well-being. And we have a set of activities, right? We got to keep these young men engaged because the young men that we work with, this is talking about the discourse and how our men are constructed. The school district defines students as Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3. Tier 1, as you can suspect, are those academic scholars, the athletes, right? The students that are up here at the top. Tier 2 are those kind of bubble students, right? Sometimes they're in trouble, sometimes they're okay. And Tier 3 are troubled students, right? And you can imagine who represents Tier 3, right? I mean, it's mostly our Latino males and African American males. And as I pointed out earlier, they're disciplined and suspended at almost 3 times the rates of other students. And so in some of our schools we're dealing with Tier 3, and some of them we're dealing with Tier 2. We have no Tier 1. That's not our interest. Our interest is to work with Tier 2 and Tier 3. So I'm getting the signal that I got to speed up here. Here are some of our learning outcomes. Again, we incorporate that into our curriculum. Our undergraduate students have to go through a service learning class. It's a 1 credit class. We're going to bump that up to 2 credits in the fall. And again, we introduce them to the research on Latino males, and we talk about mentoring approaches and principles. Again, these are some of our students, some of our graduate research. Again, I don't know if I mentioned this, but I'm the only full-time staff person at Project Males and at the Texas Consortium. I'm reliant on graduate students to do the work, right? I've got about 9 graduate students that I supervise. At Texas A&M, Dr. Mohan supervises 2. And that's how we do the work. That's how, we're able to support them through tuition and through salaries. But again, you know how students are. They got another job. They got to finish up their Ph.D. or their master's. But that's how we do the work. All right, some of our achievements here. Kind of have to brag on ourselves a little bit, right? In fact, last week we had PBS NewsHour come to visit us and interview us for 2 days. So in September, I'll let Lupe and Omar here know that when that comes out. But you can see they did a story. It's only going to be a 7-minute piece, but it's part of a series, a week-long series on education, educators that are making a difference. And we came out with a piece in the Atlantic too, I think, last week. So, again, research, the dissemination, the books. These are the research briefs. I'll be happy to share research briefs with you. You can go to our website. Again, all the conferences that we attend to get our work out. We're going to develop a toolkit. We're learning a lot from the work that we're doing. In the 3 years that we've been doing this work, part of the consortium work that we do institutional site visits. And so I'm part of the UT team, and we go and visit all 14 of our institutions, and we do an environmental scan for 2 days. We talk to the Latino males and the African American males. We talk to faculty and staff that are serving these young men, and that way we determine what's going on in that institution. And we visited 14 institutions. And with that information, we produce reports that we give back to the institution, to the leadership, and then we're going to combine a larger white paper that's going to capture commonalities and themes across all of our 14 site visits. And we're going to create a toolkit, right? Because the next step for the consortia, this next iteration of the consortium, Consortium 2.0, not very sexy title, but for now that's what we're calling it, is that we're going to start helping these institutions to actually change their policies and programs, right? You collect the data, and then it's got to be action-oriented research, right? It's got to mean something, and so we're going to hopefully share that. We're going to share that with leadership, and we're going to have impact change through policy and programs.